And welcome to Grandad's Reviews. Today I'm going to have a look at focus bracketing on Fuji X cameras. I'm going to use using the X-T30 for this demonstration, and we'll have a look at the settings, how to set it up, would be the best settings for different situations, and what those settings mean. So I'll show you the setup and we'll go through the settings and we'll go through from there. Right, so this is the setup I'm using. I've got the X-T30 with a 35mm 1.4, wide open at 1.4. Got my model Bugatti, because I couldn't afford the real thing. And at the moment, the camera's focused on the front of the actual car, and the rest fades out of focus at the back. So what I want to do is get the whole car in focus at 1.4 using focus bracketing. So let's dive into the menus and get that set up. So if we get into the menus, we need to go up to shooting settings, drive settings. There, I'm using bracketing 2 settings, and I've got that set to focus bracketing. And then we go down to focus bracketing. We have all these settings. Now the first setting, pretty obvious. How many frames do you want to take? And it goes from 1 to 999. So let's set that to 20 frames. We'll miss steps, go to interval, and that's the interval between each shot. So if you want them to take one after the other straight away, 0, or if you want to leave a second gap or a 2-second gap. I found that useful if you're shooting just in RAW. It gives time for the buffer to clear and it doesn't slow right down. So we'll leave that on 0 at the moment. Then we've got step. This is the most confusing one. It sounds like it means you're going to take 1 step, do it, or up to 10 steps. But it isn't actually how many steps the camera is going to take. It is actually the amount the focus is going to move at each step. So 1 step, the focus is going to move a small amount, but if we put it on 10, the focus is going to move a large amount. Now, I did find an explanation on the internet, a paragraph from a discussion, which reads, when using the focus bracketing feature on Fujifilm cameras, users can set the step value from 1 to 10. The step is calculated using the distance between the near and far limit of the depth of field on the first image captured. Setting the step to 1 moves the focus by approximately 20% of that distance. A step of 5 moves the focus by around 100% of that distance. As an example, if the difference between the near and far limit of depth of field is 4 feet, a step of 5 would move the focus point 4 feet for each shot. Right, let me see if I can explain the steps a bit better. So what the camera is actually doing is when it takes that first shot, it's looking at the depth of field that is created. So this is 1.4, so my depth of field is very, very narrow. Now, when you select a step, it will use that setting to work out a percentage of that depth of field that it's going to move. So, as in our explanation, we're saying that step 5 is 100% of your depth of field. So if my depth of field is that amount, from there to there, it's going to move the focus point exactly the same again, 100%, and then again, then again. So in this instance, That'll be our first shot, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and so on until it actually hits infinity. The only problem is we don't know what that percentage is, so we have to trial and error. So if you pick 10 and you think it's going to be double your depth of field, we're not sure what depth of field the camera's actually considering. So this is where a bit of trial and error work comes around to it. So when we set our settings, if you're doing a macro shot where your depth of field is very, very, very shallow, then you could probably get away with 10 steps because it's going to use a percentage of that very narrow depth of field. The steps will also relate to the frames that you've set. So in this case, I've set 20 frames to do a 10 step. So when it takes the first shot and it works out, okay, I've got to go twice that distance, the first shot will be there, second shot will probably be there, third there, fourth there, fifth there, and so on. If it hits infinity at the 10th frame, it will stop because it doesn't need to go any further. But if I set that to 1, and it's going to move a small amount, so it goes a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, it might hit the 20th frame here and it will stop, which means it hasn't finished its range. So the smaller the step, the more frames you're going to have to add. Now 10 steps will probably be very good for a landscape, a large landscape, because your depth of field is quite large, even at small apertures, but you'll probably be using f11 or somewhere around there, so it won't have to do as many frames. So you could probably set that at 10 steps and 5 frames and get it done. But if you're doing macro or very close work like this and you want all of it in focus, your depth of field is very narrow, so you're going to have to use a small step. So we'll use probably step 1, but I'm going to have probably 150 frames. So first off, I'm going to set this with 20 frames, 10 steps, 0 interval. Right, we'll make sure it's focused on that first one there. Make sure dial set to bracketing 2. So we're set, so this is 10 steps, 20 frames. Let's see what it takes. And there we go. So how did it take? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So we took 20 shots, and here's the last one. Probably needed more. And this time we'll change it to 50 frames. Focused on there again. Let's see what we got on that. So that's our last shot and our first shot. And 50 frames was just got that just starting to come into focus. So let's try that in 5 steps at 50 frames and see if that makes any difference. Keep it on 50, I'll take this to 5. And we'll take that off again. And our last one, and there's our first one. It's hardly moved. So now, let's try that. We'll try 100 frames. 5 steps. We're still focused there. And see what that comes out at. Looks like it's going to use all 100. So our last frame is just coming up to the tailgate. So, 100 frames. 10 steps. So we're going to take 100 frames, but on the biggest setting. Let's see what we get. First shot, our last shot, and somewhere around the 80, in the 80s, we've got the full depth of the car. So from there, keeps going, doesn't it? From there to there has taken us 80 shots at the biggest step. So on step 10, 80 shots has got us there. So to do that in one steps, it's probably going to take us 200 or 300 shots. But I'd only use one steps if I was just doing macro photography, when you can get a bit closer. I haven't got a macro lens, so I can't check that. But as you can see, the step actual distance varies on what your depth of field is on that first shot. If you've got a huge depth of field on that first stop, so if your depth of field was the whole car, then it's going to get to infinity quicker and you'll have less frames to do. But this is the biggest step it can take. It's taken 80 shots to get to that stage there. So if we just do that again, but we'll use the 5 steps, it's probably going to take 200 shots. Let's have a look. I'll take this to 300 shots. Take this to 5. So 5, it's saying it's 100% of its depth of field. Let's see where it gets to. You can see the progress on the screen. We've actually reached the end of the car. Looks like it will use all 300 to get to infinity. So looking at the images, so the last shot is right in the distance, first shot. So that was 300 shots at 5 step, and we went past the car. So when you've taken all your bracketed shots, you need to move them over to your computer and blend them with a software of your choice. I'll leave that for another video, and I'll show blending all those bracketed shots in Photoshop and see what we get. So that was my look at focus bracketing on Fuji X cameras. As you can see, there's a correlation between the number of frames and the steps you use. If you're doing a large landscape, then you could probably use step 10 and you probably only need 3 to 5 frames because of the depth of field that you have and how many jumps that the camera would make. But if you're doing macro or really close up, then you're going to have to drop the steps down but increase the number of frames. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. If you want to see any more like this, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be notified, hit that bell one. Till next time, see you later.